Things that you would want to include in it are certainly things that are difficult to replace. Birth certificates, social security cards, marriage certificates, things that you might keep in a safety deposit box or you might be keeping at home. And so if you're keeping them at home, definitely then you would want to put them in a fireproof and waterproof container that you can take with you.
Organizing important papers, documents, and photographs takes a little skill and a lot of motivation. The goal is getting financial and other important documents and items of personal value into one location so they can be quickly accessed in an emergency, such as a fire, flood, or tornado. On today's Sound Living, developing a strategy for protecting important papers from damage. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. K-State Research and Extension Family Resource Management Specialist Elizabeth Kish recommends starting the organizing process by placing documents, papers, and other personal items such as photos, letters, or other keepsakes, things that would be the most difficult or most expensive to replace, in a central location. Elizabeth, when it comes to financial emergency preparedness, it really starts with being aware, in Kansas especially, just being aware of the weather conditions.
That's true, and certainly in Kansas we have to be aware of that, whether it's winter or summer, spring, fall, anytime it seems like. So there's some things we need to learn and review, and then also some things to do.
We're really looking primarily at the things that can cause the largest amount of damage.
When it comes to financial emergency preparedness, what we're thinking about is we have emergencies that will cost us money, but then there's also, when it comes to disaster or storm damage, I think we have to think about also the time cost and what it would cost us to replace some of our papers, documents that we will need. One of the best things to do is to start or add to what's being called a grab-and-go box. And that means if bad weather's approaching, or a flood, or you need to evacuate your house, you just take it and go, and you have what you need to then recover from any eventual loss. And really what a lot of this is about is protecting yourself from loss incurred during a severe weather event. Things that you would want to include in it are certainly things that are difficult to replace. Birth certificates, social security cards, marriage certificates, things that you might keep in a safety deposit box or you might be keeping at home. And so if you're keeping them at home, definitely then you would want to put them in a fireproof and waterproof container that you can take with you. So you probably want to have copies of passports, driver's licenses, credit cards, those kind of things, titles for vehicles, insurance policies, for sure property insurance, and also some health insurance. A lot of these things we have online nowadays, but it's also still good to keep some paper copies. And so this is where you'd want to keep your paper copies.
Exactly, because you never know exactly what's going to happen during this event. You may not have access to the online information.
That's right. So depending on the severity of any sort of emergency, we have become very dependent on things online, and we may be able to do some things faster with paper. We just don't know. Another thing that you really want to start or continue to add to is the household inventory, because this will be really helpful to you if you need to make claims on your insurance.
And this is something that, as you mentioned, is kind of a fluid process, because every time you make a new purchase or replace an older item with a newer item, you need to update that inventory.
That's correct. Household inventory, like many financial tasks, can be a bit daunting, especially if we haven't started it yet. So what we recommend is just start with one room at a time, or even one part of a room at a time. Something, again, like most things when it comes to managing your money, something is better than nothing. So start with one room, and you can videotape it with our phones nowadays. You can take pictures, you can take video. That's a start. I mean, that's not the whole thing, because you do need to have some documentation about when things were purchased and what their value was. But again, it's a start. Then be sure that you take your documentation from your phone and store it in a way electronically that you can access if something would happen to your phone. It's always a good idea to review your insurance anyway, but in this time of year, it's good to review it specifically with an eye to what's covered in terms of storm damage. And then if you feel that your coverage isn't adequate, you need to speak with your insurance provider and talk about what changes you might like to make.
What's the process for determining how much insurance you really should have in terms of your actual living structure?
Homeowners Homeowners insurance protects your home and the contents in event of damage or loss. If you purchase a house with a loan, the lender requires that homeowner's insurance. So many people who have a mortgage have homeowner's insurance. And so the physical building is the collateral for the loan, and that's why we have to maintain the home. But if your mortgage is paid off, then you may not have homeowner's insurance. So you want to cover your home and contents for at least 80% of its replacement cost. But you also need to see what disasters or what severe weather events are actually covered, because it does vary from policy to policy. A standard policy might cover fire, lightning, windstorms, hail, freezing of plumbing or pipes, damage from the weight of ice. And while this is not likely to happen in Kansas, some do cover volcanic eruptions.
We'll hope that doesn't happen in Kansas. Floods is the one that seems to kind of sneak up on people. A lot of times they think they're covered and find out they're not.
Right. And flooding is, I think we have to think about, there's different parts of flooding. There's the water damage part, and then there's flooding if you live near a river or body of water, right? And so we hear a lot about flood insurance, and that's its own special program, and you really are only able to buy that if you are in a designated floodplain. And you probably know this because you may not have been able to build, or it might be hard to get a mortgage. So you should know that, and that's a choice that you have to make.
Let's talk a little bit about what we do as part of this process. We've got all of our things together. We've got it all in one location. Do we practice like we would for a fire, a tornado? Do we go through and know exactly what we're going to do when we need to grab this bag and go?
Yes, part of being prepared is really to practice and also to communicate your plan, right? So we need to have a plan, just like you mentioned with a fire or tornado. I mean, all of us grew up, fire drills, tornado drills, the whole bit. And it's really important to continue to do that with your family members, and especially to know how you will communicate with your family members if, as is likely to happen, you're not all going to be at home. And so you'll be dispersed around your community. And so what will you do so that you can communicate with one another afterwards? Also have a plan in place for your pets, and think about what emergency supplies you'll need for your family members and any animals that you might have in your household as well. And then communicate these things with everyone in your family and decide where you will meet or how you will do that. And you might designate someone outside of your local community who, for example, a relative in another state, who you will call or somehow communicate with, and everyone will touch base with that person, knowing that when an emergency happens, local areas can be chaotic.
Because this is financial information primarily that we're talking about protecting, we still want everyone to know where that grab-and-go bag is, just in case something happens when mom or dad is not in the home. They've got to share where everything is located so that bag can get out of the house.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yes, you're right. So if the children are home or something, and then they would know that whoever is there should take the box, the bag, the whatever it is, because you're right, people will need it. I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point.
And we want to make sure that these are copies that are in the grab-and-go bag, or are these originals and we keep copies somewhere else? How do we do this?
Well, that's a good question. Some of these things you will keep. If you keep the originals in your safety deposit box, then you would keep the copies in your box and take it. Recognizing, though, that depending on the event, the safety deposit box may not be accessible, especially right away. So that's why you definitely want to have copies for some of these things. Also, a copy is good because, you might keep a copy of some things in the cloud and then have a paper copy of some things as well. So there should be some backup, but, you can only be so prepared. The idea is, again, not to make it sound so impossible to accomplish, because it's not, but just to take small steps and make progress.
Is it recommended to maybe keep a little bit of petty cash in there as well?
Yeah, you probably do want to keep some cash. Thinking about how you use cash on a regular basis, and that will be your guide. If you are like me and you don't carry a lot of cash, then yeah, probably some money would be good to have.
How in depth do we go here? Do we have a change of clothes? Do we get that exact?
Yes, actually, it would be a good idea. And some of these for the emergency supply kit, that information is really available at ready.gov. And so they have really good detailed things. But you do want to think about at least one change of clothes for everyone in the household. You need at least a gallon of water a day per person for at least 3 days for both drinking and sanitation, right? And again, if you have dogs, cats, whatever, you have to make provision for them as well. You need at least 3 days supply of food, non-perishable. Don't forget the can opener. Any prescription medications, eyeglasses, infant formula, diapers, pet food, that kind of, all those things. And plan for about 3 days.
And you better start planning well in advance, because this, we can tell already, is not something you can throw together at the last minute and still get out of the house.
Right. I mean, you don't want to be putting things together as you go, right? So you want to have it already prepared for it, that you can just walk out the door, run out the door, take it with you. Yeah.
I guess the other advantage to actually doing this is the fact that you will suddenly know where all of your important information is, because we all know that as time goes on, things get filed in different rooms, different places at different times, and sometimes our material can get kind of spread throughout the house, and this will get it all into that one central location.
That's a really good point. Yeah, things do they sort of move around the house. So definitely when it comes to paperwork, this is an opportunity. I mean, this is a form of record keeping, and it's just being that much more proactive to have it in case of an emergency. But it's definitely all the same records that you would be keeping anyway, probably.
It's going to be difficult to keep every family photo in this location. Is this where we maybe rely a little bit more on technology and we put some of those things on a flash drive?
Yes. Unfortunately, photos are often the things that are damaged, especially water damage, right? So this is another project to digitize your images and then put them someplace in the cloud or on a disk or on a flash drive that you'll have at least the images, if not the frames, and the actual tactile picture.
How expensive will it be to get one of these fireproof boxes, and are there certain things we should look for when we're out buying this type of a box?
I'm not actually sure. I would say, under $20, but I could be wrong. I haven't priced one, so that's not a question that I feel comfortable answering. But you do want to make sure that it is fireproof and waterproof. Probably, as you mentioned, it should close easily. You may want to make sure it locks, but again, if it's too complicated, then you have to remember either a combination or know where the keys are. And so you have to be sure that you have access to the keys. So you can't hang the keys on someplace and then go off and forget them.
I know everybody probably is thinking, this is never going to happen to me. Do I really need to go through all of this effort for something that probably is not going to happen?
Okay, so if you keep things in the attic, right, you run the risk of a roof leak. If you keep things in the basement, then you might have water seeping up from the ground. Or think about this, though, and this actually happened to me. It was either the water heater or the water softener. I think it was the water heater went out and started leaking all over the place. That wasn't a natural disaster, but it was in the basement. We had a lot of water in the basement, and luckily we had all of our papers at least at a high enough level that they weren't damaged. But, that can happen. So even non-weather-related events can cause water damage to your house. Or you have a pipe that bursts in your wall and drips all over the place. That happened in my family, not to me, thank goodness. So I think all of these preparedness things are useful. Yeah, you might not have a tornado, you might not have a fire, you might not have flood damage, but you could still have some of these internal mechanical things in your house, and then you'll be prepared.
And as you mentioned, this is something that you can do over time. Start with the really important documents first.
Right. I mean, I would always recommend start with the things that are hardest to replace or most expensive to replace, and then go from there.
The good thing about this is it's really not a financial strain. It's really more of a time management issue when it comes to taking care of this.
It is. It's very much a being organized kind of thing. And so if you look at it and think, okay, I have an hour, or I'm just going to put an hour in. I'm going to do as much as I can do in an hour. Then you just work through it, and then maybe the next month you have another hour, and eventually you've made progress.
That's K-State Research and Extension Family Resource Management Specialist Elizabeth Kish. More information on personal finance is available at county and district extension offices and on the extension website, www.ksre.ksu.edu. For more information on disaster preparedness, go to www.ready.gov. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.